Hi everyone. So today I sat down with one of my roommates and we watched Young Justice to support Independence Day. If you're not familiar with it, the first season of Young Justice centers around July 4th and it's really well written. I just have so much appreciation for that show. But then my other roommate sat down and he wanted to watch some left-wing political comedy shows. And I think both of these were from Comedy Central. And for me, this was just a moment to think about how much TV comedy has declined because they were both in the mold of The Daily Show and The Stephen Colbert Show. But I think even if you are very much in the political left, this must be a point where you can tell, just as you're sitting watching, how these are not nearly as funny as those older shows were. Now, the thing about The Daily Show and The Stephen Colbert Show is those come up a lot in think pieces and discussions of politics because for about a generation of millennials, The Daily Show and The Stephen Colbert Show were their source of news. And the problem with that is that Jon Stewart is a comedian. To the extent that he gives a political analysis, it obviously would reflect Jon Stewart's political presuppositions. And Stephen Colbert wasn't a conservative. He was mocking sort of the bombastic personality of Bill O'Reilly. Now, when I was in college, my roommates were, I would call them centrists who voted Obama, but were not as left as Barack Obama. And this would prompt a lot of great discussions between us. I think over the course of time, I kind of persuaded them that they were much more, their being centrist made them much more conservative than they thought they were by the standards of the radical left. And we would use The Daily Show or The Stephen Colbert Show as a topic of discussion because sometimes it would be harder for me to make the case that Stephen Colbert is biased or that Jon Stewart is biased because occasionally they would still throw in a few jokes at the expense of leftists as well as jokes at the expense of conservatives. The two shows I watched today, one of them is the Jim Jefferies Show on Comedy Central, and the other is The Opposition with Jordan Klepper. And they both seem to kind of like follow that format. Jim Jefferies seems to remind me of Jon Stewart's The Daily Show in that he just sort of presents left-wing arguments with a little bit of comedic irony or bitter sarcasm in his voice. And The Opposition with Jordan Klepper is clearly trying to rip off the Stephen Colbert Show, where Jordan Klepper is playing Stephen Colbert, playing Bill O'Reilly. And I'll get into the details of both of those and why it's so weird. I guess the important thing to consider is how do you know if something is biased or not? And what my old centrist roommates would say to me is because The Daily Show and Stephen Colbert make fun of both sides, that makes them balanced, that makes them unbiased. But then I would have to argue that they're communicating a message that's more sophisticated than that. For example, when Stephen Colbert makes fun of the right, he makes fun of the right for being bad. When Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert make fun of the left, they make fun of the left for not looking cool or not being hip enough. So it's not that the left is bad for opposing gay marriage. Those leftists in gay marriage, am I right? Ha ha ha. The joke is that the Democrat dressed up in a funny outfit, or the Democrat said something ridiculous about the internet being a series of tubes or of islands being able to tip over or something so ridiculous that you have to make fun of it because it sounds so silly. But the tenor of the humor is not, it is bad to think leftist thoughts or hold leftist positions. But I could still laugh while watching the Stephen Colbert Show with my roommates, even as I was kind of aware as I was watching it that this is a biased show. I shouldn't take this seriously as a source of news. These two news shows from Comedy Central, I just see so much decline in them. So first off, the Jim Jefferies episode I watched. I'm not even going to try to hunt these up and play the clips because it's just it's such low-hanging fruit. It's not worth a in-depth response video. This is just a moment for a sad commentary on how unfunny this is. But the Jim Jefferies Show was all about border children and evil Republicans. It's an insult to compare Republicans to Nazis because at least the Nazis were smarter and more organized than Republicans were. And at one point, Jim Jefferies looks at the camera and says, "Oh, real funny show we got here, right?" And then there's just this awkward silence. He is self-aware enough to know that his comedy show isn't funny. It's all politics. And so his joke is that his comedy show isn't funny. So that was just sort of just standard, generic left-wing comedy show cringe. But the opposition with Jordan Klepper is much more interesting. When you look at it as trying to be a meager imitation of the Stephen Colbert show, because they are so unaware of what the right actually thinks or believes. They have not listened to conservatives or Christians or anyone to the right of them enough to do a convincing parody of the right. So the first problem that the opposition with Jordan Klepper has is they would break character at times in a way that undermines their whole bit. So Jordan Klepper comes on, he's pretending to be the right-wing type. Oh, those libs, am I right? The fake news is trying to take down my show. And then they'll just have a joke about how he thinks that Ted Cruz is like a lizard person filled with slugs. Are right-wing talk show hosts really known to just go after Ted Cruz? Or was it a matter that the writers wanted to make fun of Ted Cruz? That was a joke they wanted to make. So they stuck it in, even though it messes with the whole idea of Jordan Klepper being a boisterous conservative talk show guy. And then they're all the same things. They had the bit about the nasty anti-abortion Christian woman who writes children's books like The Little Engine That Couldn't Get an Abortion. They had, I guess, like characters who are supposed to be gay, but they're also anti-gay right Republicans. But then it's towards the end of this one episode that it got really bizarre. So Jordan Klepper looks around to the audience and he says, I need to make sure that there are no liberals in the room. Does anyone here know the promo code for a Blue Apron subscription? And no one answers. So what it sounds like he's saying is, I need to make sure there are no liberals in the room. I want to make sure there are only conservatives in the room. Does anyone know what Blue Apron is? No one answers. And he says, okay, that means there are only conservatives in the room. The problem is that some of the most popular conservative political podcasts advertise for Blue Apron. So if the point of the joke was to let's make sure there are no liberals in it. What clearly is true is they haven't paid attention enough to conservative culture to know when a joke about conservatives making sure there are no liberals around will fall flat. So that was just a biff joke. And then Jordan Klepper goes on to talk about how, gee, fellow conservatives, I think we're the bad guys. And what that is that's a fundamental betrayal of what the whole point of this sort of character is supposed to be. Jordan Klepper is supposed to be playing a boisterous and blunt conservative, but then he goes on a 5-minute rant about how conservatives are evil, Nazi dictators who hated John McCain. He made reference to this. So John McCain has brain cancer, and some on the right who hated John McCain made fun of him and told caustic jokes about how, well, I'm glad he's dead. But plenty on the left did that as well. That doesn't work if you are trying to portray the generic suit and tie conservative on talk radio or on cable TV news. Then he goes outside. He just wanders outside all of a sudden, and he starts fighting all of the enemies of the right. So they have him fight Antifa and punch a feminist and knock over a snowflake and rip the arm off of the fake news. And then it cuts back and it shows him like being a goofball swinging around at nothing, like all of these enemies are in his head. And then just some old farmer comes up and says, hey, your words cause damage. Who's going to fix this? And then Jordan Klepper goes, oh, and he runs away. So a show that is based on the idea of making fun of the right by having your character portray a conservative character ends with about 6 minutes of Jordan Klepper breaking character, pretty much just saying he hates the right, then swinging at a bunch of imaginary enemies and being told that his speech is dangerous and then running away. The opposition with Jordan Klepper isn't a show you should even bother to watch out of political interest. It's not even sophisticated propaganda. So as an artist, I can admire sophisticated propaganda because it takes some work and it takes some effort to dress up a political argument in such a way that it becomes palatable to people on the other side. You have to take an argument and you have to maybe couch it in a story or couch it in humor so that people who disagree with you sort of nod their head and say, yes, I see the sense in your sense of humor, or I see the sense in your, moving fictional story of this young person that conservatives need to be more sympathetic for. We've now reached the point where Comedy Central and left-wing comedy is so out of touch with the right that they can't even make fun of the right anymore. I think the only people who could watch The Opposition with Jordan Klepper are people who were obsessed with Stephen Colbert, and they look to Jordan Klepper as a way of getting their little fix of that style of humor. But we've denigrated to the point where they can't even convincingly portray that character anymore. Stephen Colbert was able to capture sort of the goofy, brusque bluster of Bill O'Reilly. And if you knew who Bill O'Reilly was, or if you watched and liked Bill O'Reilly, Stephen Colbert became funnier to you because you could tell what he was making fun of. The Opposition with Jordan Klepper is so unaware of who conservatives are or what they believe that it can't even make fun of them correctly. It's a sad moment in American television and a sad moment in American political discourse. And no views for fake comedy. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later. And a huge thank you for all of my patrons on Patreon. They've got channels. You can chat with them on Twitter. They've got artist websites. All the descriptions in the link below. Dead-umch.